I've always said we need to develop our own laws and move beyond the Indian Act.
Tonight, day one of the Special Chiefs Assembly on federal legislation in Gatineau, Quebec.
They're told that this project is going to get built with or without them.
Looking back on the route of the pipeline and why some are for and against it. And Canada's House of Commons votes to ask the Pope for an apology. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. APTN drove along the 1,150-kilometer route during the heat of the Trans Mountain pipeline debate. Kinder Morgan, the company behind the pipeline, said they want a green light to go ahead with the pipeline expansion by May 31st, or they would pull out. With the Prime Minister saying the pipeline would happen and the premiers of Alberta and BC at political war over the project, APTN wanted to meet with the communities who will be directly impacted by the pipeline route. Here is Tamara Pimentel's final story from her road trip along the pipeline route.
The trip began at the end of the pipeline route, at the Kinder Morgan terminal in Burnaby, BC, where we saw the arrest of 2 protesters. We attended a salmon ceremony in Chiam First Nation, a community whose chief and council are for the pipeline. We heard concerns about the pipeline's environmental risks from Coldwater and the Shuswap Nation. The pipeline route then led us to Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta. It's one of 43 Indigenous communities to sign a mutual benefit agreement for the pipeline. There's a different mentality here in Enoch from the protesters further west.
People don't really care, besides the fact that they just want their hand in some money, so that they get a little bit of money for doing it, I guess, land-wise. But other than that, I never heard anybody talk about it, really.
And it isn't uncommon to come across an oil field worker here either. For Stephen Rain, it's a way of life.
That's what we do, is do pipeline and oil field work. So, I mean, to me, it has to be done. I can't see any other way for it to be.
That was my bread and butter for 20 plus years, so I mean, I'm kind of biased that way.
Roger Buck has had years of experience in the oil industry. He says he'd prefer to see an expansion along the existing route than the use of a train to transport oil.
In my opinion, the pipeline has to go. I mean, it's essential not only for Alberta, for the rest of Canada.
Emily Jackson, who lives near the reserve, disagrees.
I don't want the forest and the animals and everything. I don't want none of that ruined. And you're also taking away jobs from transport drivers. They deliver fuel back and forth too, so I mean, that's job losses there.
The 1,150-kilometer journey ends at the gates of Kinder Morgan in Edmonton, where security trucks patrolled us near the Trans Mountain expansion construction site. Ariel Deranger is the executive director of Indigenous Climate Action. She lives in Edmonton but is a member of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, another community throwing their name behind the expansion project. She says she feels betrayed, not by her leadership, but by the government.
You tell communities that are living in abject poverty, or maybe not even abject poverty, but that are just making it to get by, that they have this opportunity to create these programs, to have health centers, to be able to hire more staff, to do all of these things that they've been dreaming of doing for so long. But in order to have that, they have to compromise their values. And the only reason they're willing to do that, compromising of values, is because they're told that this project is going to get built with or without them.
She isn't proposing to shut down the tar sands. She thinks the country should be shifting away from fossil fuels.
One of the biggest issues around the Trans Mountain pipeline is the fact that this is a project that would lock the Alberta economy and the national economy into an oil economy past 2030, when we're supposed to be taking aggressive action on our climate.
We visited several Indigenous people who will be impacted by the pipeline. We've heard concerns about environmental risks if the line is built, and concerns about lack of resources if it isn't. While Indigenous communities can impact the final decision, it's in the hands of the Trudeau government and the province of BC and Alberta to give a green light by May 31st. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Edmonton.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. On Tuesday, the Assembly of First Nations kicked off the first day of its special assembly. Hundreds of chiefs are meeting to discuss incoming Canadian legislation and to hear from some guests, invited or otherwise. Tom Fenario has the story.
On behalf of my Anishinaabe people, welcome to unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory.
On the first day of the AFN Special Assembly, sovereignty was invoked many times. But not everyone can agree on exactly how to get there.
Point of order. Point of order at this time, please.
Canada may have convinced some foolish Indians to sell us out and extinguish our inherent rights, but we as sovereign people are not on the market.
Mohawk elder and activist KAHENTINETHA Horn ignores assembly rules and grabbed the mic to denounce the proceedings. She presented a cease and desist letter before speaking her mind.
You and your AFN are illegitimate and do not hold jurisdiction as negotiators of our rights.
Horn took no solace from the fact that much of the morning was spent promoting the Indigenous Rights Framework. The framework is touted as a way to recognize and implement rights with future consultations.
We know that we need to fix Canada's laws, policies and practices. I've always said we need to develop our own laws and move beyond the Indian Act and exert that inherent right to self-determination.
Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett spoke about the implementation of the framework. She says meetings with First Nations regarding the framework's contents will continue and that October 2019 remains the target date to set it in motion.
We're trying to get out of the way. The era of Ottawa determining how and when and where your rights are implemented is over. And you need to hear from me directly. Nothing will be imposed.
Bellegarde is optimistic that the framework can put an end to having to prove First Nation rights in Canada's courts.
I think there's a consensus that everybody wants to move beyond the Indian Act. There is a consensus that we want to make sure that First Nations rights, Aboriginal rights and title are recognized and affirmed. We want to make sure that treaties are finally honored according to their spirit and intent.
For her part, Horn sees a conflict of interest with the AFN advocating for sovereignty when band councils are funded by Canada.
They are Canadian government employees. They work for committees called band councils. And they are put up there, up front, by the Canadian government to pretend that they speak for us, but they don't.
Wednesday, the Assembly will hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Gatineau, Quebec.
Tuesday afternoon, the AFN also heard from Andrew SCHEER and JAGMEET SINGH. Here's Tom Fenario again with what they had to say.
First up was Conservative Party leader Andrew SCHEER, who has 12 First Nations in his riding. SCHEER says that he would like to close the financial gap between First Nations and Canadians and has an idea of how that could be done.
So many First Nations and Indigenous people who have embraced the development of our energy resources and are excited about the opportunities that it can bring to their communities. It's time we found ways to extend those opportunities to the Indigenous people of this country.
When it comes to energy, NDP leader JAGMEET SINGH took a different approach.
You deserve to know the truth. And that's why I support Grand Chief Stuart Phillips' call for the government to release all documents pertaining to Kinder Morgan and the approval process to see the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations prepare to get these documents in Clorth, to make sure that we know what actually happened, to know if these consultations were actually genuine or not.
Both leaders took shots at the Liberals, saying that they're not putting enough of their promises into actions. When it came time to questions, Regina Crowchild of the Blackfoot Nation asked how they would be any different.
My question to you is, do you believe we are sovereign peoples? Do you truly believe that we have a right of self-determination? And would you not allow your legislations to interfere in our lives?
We are in the process of putting forward some fundamental principles and platform positions on various things in the lead up to the next election. So you'll understand if today we're not in a position to make specific commitments on specific things
Singh was more committal when it came to Crowfoot's question.
It's inherent and intrinsic that the people that are sovereign should have the ability to govern in a manner that is sovereign, in a manner that respects that right of self-determination. So this is what we believe in firmly. It's what I believe in as leader.
We'll be here tomorrow with more from the AFN Special Assembly. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Gatineau, Quebec.
And we'll have more for you from the floor of the Assembly of First Nations Special Gathering in Gatineau, Quebec later in the show. Parts of BC are in the midst of what some believe could be record flooding, and some communities are being evacuated. We'll have more on that after the break. Here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Plus 19 in Halifax, clouds and plus 22 in Fredericton, sun and plus 3 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, a cooler minus 5 in Nain, cloudy skies in Quebec, plus 22 in Montreal and St. Jovie, plus 25 in Toronto, Sarnia, and Windsor, overcast and plus 14 for Thunder Bay, 5 above in Big Trout Lake, over in Manitoba, a cloudy plus 10 for Thompson and Island Lake, 16 above in Dauphin, Brandon, and Winnipeg, where it will be sunny skies. In Saskatchewan, plus 17 in Saskatoon and North Battleford. Parts of northern Saskatchewan will see precipitation, plus 12 in Stony Rapids, and plus 9 in Uranium City. Canadian MPs voted today to ask Pope Francis to apologize to residential school survivors.
To move our nation on a path of true healing for the crimes of the residential school era, the House invite Pope Francis to participate in this journey with Canadians by...
It happened this afternoon in the House of Commons. The vote passed by a large margin of 269 to 10. The 10 opposed were all Conservative politicians. A Quebec judge has ruled that a Mohawk community's marry out, get out law is unconstitutional. Quebec Superior Court Justice Thomas Davis declared Kahnawake membership rule is discriminatory and violates the Federal Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The case was heard in court last year over a rule commonly referred to as marry out, get out, which states that anyone who marries a non-Indigenous person must leave Kahnawake territory, even if they marry a band member. We'll have more for you on this in the coming days. Flooding throughout multiple communities in British Columbia has affected hundreds of properties across the province's interior, and some communities are being evacuated. Warm weather is causing the high snowpack to melt, and lakes and rivers are rising quickly. Some residents trapped by floods in the Cariboo region were evacuated by helicopter, and a state of local emergency has been declared in Cawston. Eric Thompson from the Emergency Operations Center in Okanagan says flooding like this is hard to predict.
There is a lot of snow still in some of the surrounding hills, and how this plays out will vary from area to area. But I believe it's important, it is important for residents who are affected to monitor social media whenever possible, to monitor their local media, to keep tuned into what's happening is really important, because then if things are changing for better or worse, we'll be able to get that information out as quickly as possible.
When looking for Indigenous figures, there's not much info popping up on Wikipedia. But as Shirley McLean tells us, a group of Yukon writers have started a weekathon event to indigenize one of the world's most visited websites.
It's a quiet afternoon as a group of volunteer writers have taken on the task to indigenize Wikipedia. Organizer Heather Steinhagen says Wikipedia has become a valuable first step to researching any topic. However, there's little to no information regarding key Yukon First Nations people.
When you do a search of prominent Yukon First Nations, you're not going to find a whole lot. So putting our own stories onto the largest encyclopedia is to our benefit to get important information out there.
Wikipedia is a free online encyclopedia, and it's often the first place where university students like SARA ANDRADE go to start their research. She's writing about Yukon's land claim.
from what I understand, it's a very special agreement of its kind in Canada, and I want to just learn more about it. So this is like the perfect excuse to read about it, because you get to then summarize it for others.
One woman who was a big part of the land claim was Judy Gingell. She was the chair of the Council for Yukon First Nations when the land claim was signed in 1993. But Gingell's wiki page doesn't do her accomplishments justice.
Judy Gingell was the Commissioner of the Yukon. She was honored with the Governor General. She was part of the Yukon Native Brotherhood. And that's all I found so far in the last hour.
And only one of those things was mentioned on her Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Volunteer writer Ronnie Sue Sparvier will be adding more information to Gingell's Wikipedia page.
I was hoping to read about how she grew up. I want to know about her parents, how many siblings she has, her schooling. I want to know how she became the person that she became, because I would like to do that.
Sparvier says she and other volunteers will be looking to add more information to important but not well-known people on Wiki.
I think this project is really valuable because there are so many accomplished First Nations people in the Yukon and in Canada who are too humble to say, hey, look what I did. So I think it's great that we have a room full of people here who are interested in bringing their stories up to people in Canada, because it's important for us to tell our story.
Shirley McLean, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Very cool initiative. 100 youth are taking part in a first-of-its-kind symposium in Edmonton. It's geared for people between the ages of 18 to 25 who are aging out of the child welfare system. And they will have an opportunity to help improve that system by telling their stories about what works and what doesn't. APTN's Chris Stewart was there.
They come from all across Alberta, from treaties 6, 7, and 8. Justina Wesley is from Morley, Alberta. She wants to get into leadership. She says this symposium is a great way to make new connections and friends.
That's the things one of the nations need to do, is connect with one another, because connections have been lost long ago, and that's very sad. And that's why, one of the important things here is making connections and friends. And
most of the youth here have been in the child welfare system. The Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations brought them here to learn firsthand what needs to be improved. Jerry Saddleback Jr. is one of the organizers.
The beauty of this is once we gather all this information, it's going to be shared with all our First Nations within Treaty 6, 7, and 8. It's going to be shared provincially, federally. So this information is going to go everywhere. And so it's not just, we didn't want to focus specifically on CFSA. And so at the end of the day, we want to have a well-rounded perspective on all areas.
Saddleback Jr. says that there are not enough resources for young people aging out of the child welfare system. What the youth say at this symposium will be used to help kids still in care. These youth have been in the system. They know what works and what doesn't. The lessons learned here will be discussed at upcoming Chiefs gatherings.
It was very crucial that we had this function focus on the 18 to 25, and then moving forward, eventually have a Chiefs gathering. And this discussion will set the tone for what's to come.
This symposium is all about youth and giving them what they need. There are panels on the history of treaties, mental health, and relationships, to learning how to spin records from DJ Creason. Brayden Anderson is from Beaver Lake Cree Nation. He jumped at the band's offer to come here.
I just want to learn what they have to offer, the treaties and all that. It's interesting stuff, so just learn what I could.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
After the break, we'll have more from the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs meeting, this time from Tim Fontaine, host of APTN's The Laughing Drum. Here's the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, plus 16 and cloudy in Fort McMurray, 15 above in Peace River, plus 19 in Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, and Medicine Hat. A mix of sun and clouds on the west coast, plus 23 in Kamloops, plus 17 in Victoria and Bella Coola, a sunny plus 13 in Smithers, a cooler plus 5 in Dease Lake, in Yukon plus 4 in Whitehorse, minus 2 in Rock River. Over to NWT, cloudy skies and cooler temperatures, plus 4 in Rays Lakes and Norman Wells, -2 in Fort McPherson, -15 in Under the Sun in Saxe Harbor. In Nunavut, looks like snow and -10 in Repulse Bay, -14 in Cambridge Bay, -12 on Wednesday in Cape Dorset and Iqaluit. Welcome back. There's another perspective of the AFN Special Chiefs meeting we want to bring you now. Host of APTN's The Laughing Drum, Tim Fontaine, joins us now from the Assembly in Gatineau, Quebec. Thanks for joining us, Tim. You're there to bring us your take on the Chiefs meeting as host of APTN's The Laughing Drum. What has caught your attention so far?
You know what, it's so exciting here right now. The air is just like charged with electricity. Like earlier today, they actually had to stop some Chiefs from crowd surfing. That's how excited they were when Federal Minister Carolyn Bennett was speaking. So just the energy in the room, it's hard to see behind me here, but it's just like an ocean of suit jackets and ribbon shirts and beaded bolo ties and headdresses as far as the eye can see. Just an absolute incredible mood here as they look towards changing this federal legislation that's coming down the pipe.
Sounds like quite the party. This is the last assembly before the election for National Chief in July in Vancouver. What kind of chances do you think Perry Bellegarde has of being re-elected?
You know what, he might look like Chachi from Happy Days, but I think that Perry Bellegarde is far more cunning than we give him credit for. So I think that if he can systematically eliminate all of the other candidates that have lined up against him, whether it's through leg wrestling or the largest headdress contest or biggest beaded bolo tie contest, I think he's got a really good chance of being our next national chief once again.
There's an encore of The Laughing Drum on tonight, but what can we look forward to in your next episode on May 8th?
Just the sights and sounds of the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs Assembly. Like I told you earlier, I mean, this is like Coachella, this is like Cannes, this is Chiefapalooza all wrapped into one. So I'm going to give you the sights and the sounds and the headdresses and the beaded bolo ties. You're going to see all of that, plus interviews with some of the people that are here. It's going to be really, really exciting.
Can't wait to see it. Thank you for your thoughts, Tim Fontaine, host of APTN's The Laughing Drum. That is your APTN National News for this Tuesday. Remember, a repeat edition of The Laughing Drum with Tim Fontaine is minutes away, but a new episode from the Special Chiefs Assembly will air next week. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.